about the African American Civil Rights Movement, we usually refer to the period between 1955 and 1968 in the South. It was social movements in the United States aimed at outlawing racial discrimination against Black Americans and restoring voting rights to them. The movement was characterized by major campaigns of civil resistance. Between 1955 and 1968, acts of nonviolent protest and civil disobedience produced crisis situations between activists and the government authorities. Federal, state, and local governments often had to respond immediately to these situations that highlighted the inequities faced by African Americans. Forms of protest included boycotts, such as the successful Montgomery bus boycott by Rosa Parks in 1955, sit-ins such as the influential Greensboro sit-ins in North Carolina in 1968, marches, and a wide range of other nonviolent activities. Leaders of the movement included Rosa Parks, as we mentioned earlier, for her brave defiance on the bus, Martin Luther King Jr., who became the leader of the civil rights movement and advocated civil disobedience in nonviolent ways, and Malcolm X, who, unlike Martin Luther King Jr., used more violent tactics to get his ways.
Law is there to uphold the human principle, that there is equal justice, because we feel it in our hearts, that this is the law of our hearts. And I think all of us now are very sober in realizing that unless we integrate, we shall very quickly disintegrate.
Other leaders of the 1960s civil rights movement included President John F. Kennedy, who, although his administration is well known for more situations of the Cold War like the Cuban Missile Crisis, was a large advocate of civil rights and often met with its leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr. His brother, Robert Kennedy, pictured here with Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, often met with its leaders as well and spoke out for African American civil rights. Sadly, though, JFK's support for the movement came to an abrupt end in Dallas, Texas on November 22, 1963, where he was assassinated. His vice president, pictured here with a very distraught Jacqueline Kennedy, took oath in office on Air Force One and continued JFK's support for civil rights in D.C. LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on July 2nd. It outlawed major forms of discrimination against racial, ethnic, national, and religious minorities, as well as women.